On Monday, May 27th, something was discovered at the Miami Police Department that made detectives question the simplicity of yet another missing persons case. The morning began with the usual hustle and bustle. Detective Jeffrey Howard arrived at the station just before 8 o'clock, as he had done for the past 18 years. At 42, he had learned to recognize cases that would require more time and effort than they initially appeared to. His partner, Wanda Daniels, arrived 20 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee and a tired expression on her face. Weekends with 3 children rarely provided much rest. The first visitors arrived at the reception desk by 9 in the morning. Sergeant Carter, who was on duty, approached the detective's table with a concerned look on his face. "We have 3 families here to report missing persons," he said, flipping through the pages of his notebook. "They say their daughters haven't come home since Saturday." Howard put down his morning reports and glanced at Daniels. She was already getting up, instinctively sensing that it was going to be a long day. 6 agitated people were waiting for them in the meeting room. Gloria Wright, a 48-year-old nurse, sat next to her husband, Roy. The woman clutched crumpled napkins in her hands, her eyes red from a sleepless night. Next to them sat the Clark family, Mother Celeste and Father Anton, as well as their eldest son, Derek, who had taken time off work to come to the police station. In the corner sat Gemma Brown's parents, Patricia and Leonard, holding hands so tightly that their knuckles were white. Wanda Daniels sat down opposite the families and turned on her tape recorder. Over the years, she had learned to speak calmly even in the most tense situations. "Tell us everything in order," she began. "When was the last time you saw your daughters?" Gloria Wright spoke first, her voice trembling. "Keisha left on Saturday around 7 in the evening. She said she was going to a party with her friends. I asked her when she would be back, but she just said she wouldn't be late. She usually always tells me where she's going and always answers my calls." Celeste Clark nodded. "Tiara also left on Saturday evening. She said the same thing, a party with friends. She never stays out overnight without telling us." Never Patricia Brown wiped her eyes. Gemma was very excited on Saturday, getting ready all day. She wore a new dress and spent a long time doing her hair. She said she was meeting up with the girls and that it would be fun. But she didn't come home. Howard recorded their statements, asking clarifying questions from time to time. He noticed that all 3 girls had left at around the same time and had told their parents almost identical stories. "Were they friends?" he asked. Derek Clark answered for everyone. "Yes, they met at the community center, in a group for young professionals. They went to career development seminars together, then became friends. They often spent time together as a threesome." "Did you try to contact them over the weekend?" "Of course," Gloria sobbed. "I called Keisha all Sunday. Her phone was on, but she didn't answer. At first, I thought she was just sleeping after the party, but by evening I was worried." The other parents confirmed the same thing. They had all tried to call their daughters on Sunday, but the girls didn't answer their calls or read their messages. Daniels asked for coffee for everyone and continued the questioning. "Tell me about the girls' behavior in recent days. Was there anything unusual?" The parents exchanged glances. Patricia Brown was the first to break the silence. "Gemma has been kind of mysterious for the last 2 weeks. She spent more time on her phone and often smiled while looking at the screen. She answered questions evasively. Keisha, too," added Gloria. "She started staying late after school more often, saying she was meeting up with friends. But she always used to tell us the details, and now she's become secretive." Celeste nodded. "And Tiara?" "Lately, she's been constantly planning something, whispering on the phone. And on Friday, she came home very late and said she had been at a cafe with her friends." Howard felt a familiar tension in his stomach. 3 young women acting secretive, disappearing at the same time. This was not like a typical drinking party or a spontaneous trip to the beach. "We're starting an investigation immediately," he told the parents. "We'll need photos of the girls, their phone numbers, and a list of their friends and acquaintances." While the parents gathered the necessary information, Daniels took Howard aside. What do you think? Too many coincidences, he replied. 3 friends, identical behavior in recent weeks, disappear on the same day. This is no coincidence. When the formalities were completed, the detectives saw the families off and immediately got to work. First, they contacted the phone company to request call details and GPS data from the girls' phones. The response came back in 2 hours, and what they saw made them look at each other in bewilderment. Jeff, look at this. Daniels pointed to the computer screen. All 3 phones show outgoing calls to emergency services on Sunday at 3:33 a.m. Howard leaned closer to the monitor. The data was clear. Keisha Wright called at 9:01:33 a.m. and 17 seconds. Tiara Clark called at 9:01:33 a.m. and 24 seconds. Gemma Brown at 3:33:31 a.m. They called within seconds of each other, Howard muttered. What the hell? Daniels was already dialing the dispatch service. 10 minutes later, they were sitting in the basement of the building where all emergency calls were recorded, along with technician Roger Lewis, a short, dark-skinned man with glasses. The recordings for Sunday, 3:33 a.m.? He asked. I'll find them right now. Lewis pressed a few keys, and the familiar voice of dispatcher Marcus Green came over the speakers. Emergency response service. What's the problem? Then there was static, crackling fragments of a woman's voice. Help. He's coming after us. The connection was lost. 7 seconds later, the phone rang again. Emergency services, what's the problem? More static, this time with a different, higher-pitched voice. Please. In the woods. I can't. He'll find us. And again, silence. The third call came 7 seconds later. Emergency services, please state your location. This time, amid the static and crackling, the sounds of nature could be heard, the rustling of leaves, the crackling of branches, and a woman's voice was screaming, He's coming! He's close. Help us. The connection was finally lost. Howard and Daniels sat in silence for a few seconds, digesting what they had heard. Can you play it back again? Daniels asked. They listened to the recording 3 times, picking up new details each time. The girls were clearly running through the woods. They were scared. Someone was chasing them. Why didn't Green send the cars? Howard asked the technician. Lewis shrugged. You can hear the quality of the connection. He couldn't determine the location, couldn't make out the address. He thought it was a false alarm or a prank. That happens several times a night. The detectives returned to their office with a copy of the recordings. The picture was starting to become clearer, but instead of answers, new questions arose. So, the girls got into trouble on Sunday around 3:30 a.m., Daniel summarized. They were in a wooded area, someone was chasing them. But what were they doing in the woods in the middle of the night? Howard wondered. And where exactly was it? The next step was to interview the girls' friends and acquaintances. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they had spoken to 15 people, classmates, colleagues, neighbors. The picture was surprisingly consistent. Brittany Wilson, Keisha's best friend from college, sat in a cafe across from the site, nervously twirling a ring on her finger. She didn't say anything about plans for Saturday. I thought we'd spend the weekend together like usual, but on Friday she said she was busy. She's been kind of distant the last few days. Deontay Johnson, Tiara's classmate, said the same thing. Tiara started hanging out with our group less. She said she had new friends, but she never introduced them or talked about them. Gemma's colleague at the insurance company, Layla Thomas, added, Gemma has been distracted at work a lot lately. She would smile while looking at her phone, receive messages, and reply immediately. When I asked her about it, she said it wasn't important. By the end of the day, the detectives realized that 2 weeks before their disappearance, all 3 girls had started acting secretive, communicating less with old friends, and spending more time on their phones. The last item on the agenda was to check the girls' social media accounts. Damian Rice, the department's IT specialist, helped them access the accounts through emergency powers. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the screen. The last posts by all three girls were made on Saturday between 8:30 and 9 p.m. There were 3 photos on the screen. Keisha, Tiara, and Gemma were sitting in a car, all 3 smiling and taking selfies. In the background, you could see the highway and the setting sun, but it was impossible to determine the exact location. "They were together," Daniels stated, "in someone's car, driving somewhere outside the city." The captions for the photos were short. Keisha's said, "Time to have fun." Tiara's said, "The best night is about to begin." And Gemma's said, "On the road with the girls." "Can you determine where this was taken?" Howard asked. Rice shook his head. "Geolocation is disabled on all 3 photos. Judging by the sun, they were heading west or northwest of the city, but that's all I can say." As the workday drew to a close, the detectives sat in their office, sorting through the information they had gathered. Photos of the 3 girls, a timeline of events, and a list of unanswered questions appeared on the board. "What do we have?" Daniels asked, leaning back in her chair. Howard looked at his notes. 3 friends, ages 21 to 23. 2 weeks ago, they started acting secretive. On Saturday night, they left town together under the pretext of going to a party. On Sunday at 3:33 a.m., all 3 call emergency services from a wooded area saying someone is chasing them. No one has seen them since. "Someone lured them out of town," Daniels said. "But who? And why?" Howard gathered the papers from the table. Tomorrow they would delve into the girls' phone records, check their correspondence, and find the person behind their disappearance. So far, they had more questions than answers, but experience told him that the case was just beginning. Outside, darkness was falling, and the lights of Miami were coming on one by one. Somewhere in this city or beyond lay the answer to what had happened to Keisha, Tiara, and Gemma on that terrible night. Tuesday began with rain drumming on the windows of the Miami police station. Detective Jeffrey Howard arrived at work at 7 in the morning, an hour before his shift began, determined to get to the bottom of the 3 missing girls' digital lives. Wanda Daniels arrived shortly after him, carrying a box of the girls' phones, which their parents had brought in the night before. "Didn't sleep well?" she asked, noticing her partner's red eyes. "I can't get the dispatch recordings out of my head," Howard replied, turning on his computer. "Those cries for help. The girls were in mortal danger." Daniels nodded, placing 3 smartphones in clear evidence bags on the table. Each was labeled with the owner's name and case number. "It's good that they all had simple passwords," she said. "The parents knew the unlock codes." They took Keisha Wright's phone first. IT specialist Damian Rice had already set up software to extract data and analyze correspondence. Hundreds of messages, photos, and call logs from the past month appeared on the screen. "Let's start with the dating apps," Howard said, opening the folder with social apps. Keisha had 3 popular dating apps installed. In the first, called Miami Date, her profile showed activity until May 18th, exactly 2 weeks before her disappearance. Detectives reviewed her correspondence with various men. Most of the conversations were superficial and ended quickly. But one conversation stood out from the rest. Starting on May 10th, Keisha actively communicated with a user under the nickname Time28. At first, the conversation was normal, exchanging photos, jokes, discussing interests. But gradually, the tone became more intimate. "Look at this," Daniels pointed to a message from May 15th. He writes, "You're so special, Keisha. I know we're right for each other. I want to meet you and your friends. It'll be fun." Howard scrolled further. On May 16th, Time28 wrote, "I have friends who are also looking for serious relationships. Maybe we can set up a double date, or even a triple date." "He showed interest in her friends right away," Howard remarked. "That's no coincidence." The last messages in the correspondence were dated Saturday, the day of the disappearance. Time28 wrote, "Let's meet at 7 at the Dolphin Plaza Shopping Center. My friends will come by car. It will be unforgettable." Keisha replied. "The girls and I are very excited. Thank you for organizing this." The detectives moved on to Tiara Clark's phone. Her activity in the apps was similar. Lots of superficial conversations and one notable correspondence with the user DevHill26. The time frame matched. Intense communication starting on May 10th, a gradual deepening of the relationship, and an invitation to meet with friends. "Too many coincidences," Daniels muttered as she took screenshots of the correspondence. Gemma Brown's phone contained the third piece of the puzzle. Her correspondence with Lamar G29 followed the same pattern. Acquaintance, flirting, an invitation to a group meeting. "They acted in a coordinated manner," Howard said, leaning back in his chair. "Three guys simultaneously get to know three girlfriends, leading them to the same goal, a group meeting." Damian Rice, who was watching them work, suggested analyzing the suspects' profiles in the apps. Half an hour later, they had all the information they needed. Ty M28 listed the name Tyrone, age 28, warehouse worker, interested in sports and cars. The photos showed a tall, dark-skinned man with an athletic build. DevHill26 introduced himself as Devin, 26 years old, a courier, a music and party lover. The photos showed a man of average height with a short haircut and a broad smile. Lamar G29 called himself Lamar, 29 years old, a delivery service worker and basketball fan. The photos showed a stocky man with tattoos on his arms. All three work in logistics, Daniels noted. Warehouse, courier service, delivery. They could have known each other through work. The next step was to check their real names through police databases. By 11 in the morning, they had complete information about the suspects. Tyrone Michael Miller, 28 years old, worked at a Miami logistics warehouse. 2 arrests for bar fights, 1 for drunk driving. Lived alone in an apartment in the Overtown neighborhood. Devin Ray Hill, 26 years old, courier for speed delivery. Arrested for theft from a car 3 years ago. Suspended sentence. Rented an apartment in Little Haiti with a roommate. Lamar Devontae Green, 29 years old, driver for Miami fresh food delivery service. Several speeding tickets, 1 arrest for disorderly conduct. Lived with his mother in Liberty City. Minor offenses, nothing serious, Howard said, studying their files. But all 3 have had run-ins with the law. By noon, the detectives decided to check the suspects' alibis. They split up. Daniels went to see Tyrone and Devin, while Howard went to see Lamar. Tyrone Miller lived in a small apartment on the 2nd floor of an old building. When Daniels knocked on the door, she heard the sound of a television and approaching footsteps. The door was opened by a tall man in casual clothes who matched the photos on the dating app. "Tyrone Miller?" she asked, showing her badge. "Detective Daniels, Miami Police. Can we talk?" The man's expression changed instantly. Confidence gave way to wariness. "What's this about?" he asked, not inviting her in. "Last weekend? Where were you on Saturday and Sunday?" Tyrone shrugged, but Daniels noticed him swallow before answering. "At home. Watching TV, playing games. Just a normal weekend. Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I live alone. What's this about?" Daniels did not reveal the purpose of her visit. "Routine check. Do you use dating apps?" "Sometimes," Tyrone replied, his voice becoming more tense. "It's not against the law." "Of course not. Are you familiar with Keisha Wright?" This time the pause was noticeable. Tyrone licked his lips. "Maybe. I talk to a lot of girls on apps. I don't remember all their names." Daniels wrote down his answers and asked him not to leave town. Tyrone's reaction suggested that he was hiding something. Devin Hill was at his roommate's house. He was a short man with a nervous laugh who constantly shifted from foot to foot during the conversation. "The weekend?" "Yes, I was at home. Playing PlayStation with Jason," he said, pointing to his roommate. "Right, Jace?" Jason, a thin guy in his 20s, nodded uncertainly. "Yeah, something like that. Although I went out with my girlfriend on Saturday night, so I don't know what Devin was doing that night. Devin quickly interrupted his roommate. I was asleep. I went to bed early and woke up late on Sunday. Daniels noted the contradiction in their statements and continued the questioning. When she asked about dating apps, Devin became even more nervous. I'm registered there, but I rarely use it. I prefer to meet people in real life. What about Tiara Clark? I don't know her, Devin replied too quickly. Meanwhile, Howard visited Lamar Green at his mother's house in Liberty City. The middle-aged woman, Dorothy Green, greeted the detective with suspicion but invited him into the house. Lamar, she called out, the police are here to see you. Lamar descended the stairs slowly, as if considering each step. He was a strong man with a wary look in his eyes. What's going on, officer? Detective Howard, I want to clarify where you were last weekend. At home with my mom, Lamar replied, glancing quickly at his mother. We watched movies and made dinner. Dorothy Green nodded. Yes, Lamar was home. He's a good boy and helps me around the house. But Howard noticed that the woman avoided direct eye contact, and her voice sounded uncertain. Do you use dating apps, Mr. Green? Like all young people, Lamar replied, but nothing serious. Are you familiar with the name Gemma Brown? Lamar paused a second longer than he should have. No, I haven't heard of her. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the detectives returned to the station and shared the results of their interviews. All 3 suspects had behaved nervously. Their alibis were weak, and their reaction to the girls' names suggested familiarity. They're lying, Daniels concluded, but we don't have any direct evidence yet. Howard agreed and suggested delving deeper into the analysis of GPS data from the girls' phones. Damian Rice had already prepared a map showing the phone's movements on Saturday evening. Look, he said, pointing to the screen. On Saturday at 7 p.m., all 3 phones were near the Dolphin Plaza shopping center. This coincides with the meeting place mentioned in the correspondence. The red dots on the map showed the phones moving northwest of the city on Highway 95. The last recorded signal was at 2:15 a.m. on Sunday, just over an hour before the emergency calls. The signal was interrupted here. Rice pointed to a spot on the map. The area of the abandoned Everglades timber sawmill, 40 kilometers from the city. The business closed 5 years ago. Howard studied satellite images of the area. The abandoned sawmill was located on the edge of Everglades National Park, surrounded by dense forest and swamps. The nearest road was 2 kilometers away, and cell phone reception in the area was poor. The perfect place for a crime, he remarked grimly. Isolated, no one around, poor communication. Daniels suggested going to the sawmill immediately, but Howard decided to conduct official interviews with the suspects at the station first. By 5 o'clock in the evening, all 3 had been brought in to give statements. Tyrone Miller was the first to be questioned. In the interrogation room, he looked less confident than he had at home. His hands trembled slightly, and his gaze constantly wandered around the room. Mr. Miller, Howard began, turning on the tape recorder. Tell us about your relationship with Keisha Wright. I already told you I don't remember her, Tyrone replied, but his voice sounded unconvincing. Daniels placed printouts of the correspondence from the dating app on the table. This is your correspondence with Keisha. 23 messages over the past 2 weeks. Tyrone glanced at the papers and swallowed. Okay, we corresponded. But I correspond with a lot of people. It doesn't mean anything. You agreed to meet on Saturday at the Dolphin Plaza shopping center, Howard continued. Where were you after 7 p.m. on Saturday? At home, I told you. Do you have a car, Mr. Miller? Yes, an old Toyota. Where is it now? Tyrone paused. In the parking lot near my house. We'd like to take a look at it, Daniels said. Do you have a warrant? We can get one, Howard replied calmly. Or you can give your voluntary consent. Tyrone ran his hand over his face. Okay, take a look. I have nothing to hide. Devin Hill's interrogation went similarly. At first, He denied knowing Tiara. But when the detectives showed him the correspondence, he was forced to admit to communicating with her. "We just chatted online," he insisted. "We never met in person." "But you agreed to meet on Saturday," Daniels objected. "Yes, but I didn't go. I changed my mind at the last minute." "Why?" Devin shifted in his chair. "I just wasn't in the mood. I stayed home." "Your roommate said he didn't know where you were on Saturday night," Howard said. "He's wrong. I was home." Devin's testimony was also full of contradictions and inconsistencies. Lamar Green was the most reserved of the three. He calmly admitted to corresponding with Gemma, but claimed that the meeting never took place. "I told her I was sick," he explained. "I canceled the meeting at the last minute." "We don't have a record of such messages in the correspondence," Daniels noted. "Maybe I sent them through another app." "Which one?" "I don't remember." "Maybe regular SMS Howard checked Lamar's phone records for Saturday. There were no messages to Gemma." "Mr. Green, you're lying to us," he said bluntly. "Where were you on Saturday night?" Lamar remained calm, but the detectives noticed his jaw muscles tense up. "At home with my mother. Ask her." By 7 o'clock, the interrogations were over. All three suspects gave contradictory statements. Their alibis were not corroborated by independent witnesses, and their behavior betrayed nervousness and attempts to hide the truth. "They definitely know something," Daniels said, as the last suspect left the station. "But we don't have enough grounds for an arrest yet." Howard nodded as he studied a map showing the location of the abandoned sawmill. "We need to go there. If the girls were really in that area, there should be clues. We'll organize a search operation tomorrow morning," Daniels decided. "We'll take a support team, dogs, and forensic experts. In the meantime, we'll put the suspects under surveillance," Howard added. "If they're guilty, they may try to get rid of the evidence or leave town." The detectives spent the evening preparing documents for the search operation and analyzing the data they had collected. The picture gradually became clearer. 3 young men had coordinated their efforts to meet 3 female friends, lured them to an isolated location under the pretext of a group meeting, and something terrible had happened there. Outside the station window, it began to rain again, and somewhere 40 kilometers from the city, an abandoned sawmill held secrets that would be revealed tomorrow. Wednesday began with a pre-dawn mist spreading over the Everglades. At 6:30 in the morning, a convoy of police cars headed for the abandoned Everglades timber sawmill, carrying with them the hopes and fears of detectives Howard and Daniels. The search party consisted of 12 people, 4 detectives, 6 patrol officers, a dog handler with 2 sniffer dogs, and forensic scientist Marianne Castro. The road to the sawmill was a broken asphalt surface overgrown with weeds and potholes. For the last 5 kilometers, the cars drove along a dirt road winding between tall pine trees and palmetto bushes. The air was humid and stifling, filled with the smells of swamp vegetation and decay. "What a disgusting place," Daniels muttered as she got out of the car near the rusty gates of the sawmill. The abandoned factory looked like the set of a horror movie. Crooked buildings with broken windows, rusted metal structures, piles of wood waste covered with ivy. Old equipment stood where the workers had left it 5 years ago, covered with rust and entwined with vines. Howard studied the map he had brought with him. The GPS shows that the last signal from the phones was recorded about 3 kilometers north of here. That's where the dense forest begins. Sergeant Martinez, who was in charge of the patrol, divided the men into sectors. Dog handler James Roberts released the dogs, letting them sniff the girls' clothes that their parents had brought. The search dogs, a German shepherd named Rex and a bloodhound named Bella, immediately picked up a trail leading north from the main sawmill building. "They were here," Roberts said, watching the dog's behavior. Rex picked up a scent, definitely human. The group moved into the forest along a barely visible trail that had probably once been used by sawmill workers. The trees grew denser with every step, their branches intertwining overhead, creating semi-darkness even in daylight. The marshy ground, covered with a layer of decayed leaves, squelched underfoot. After half an hour of walking, Bella stopped near a fallen tree and began to whimper. Roberts came closer and examined the ground. "There's something here," he called to the others. A small metal object glinted in the mud at the base of the tree. Forensic scientist Castro carefully extracted it with tweezers. It was a silver heart-shaped earring. "Keisha was wearing earrings like these when she was last seen," Daniel said, checking the description in the parent's statement. The dogs led the group further into the forest. The trail became clearer. Shoe prints, broken branches, and signs of a struggle were visible on the damp ground. About a kilometer from the fallen tree, Rex stopped near a small clearing and began to bark. What they saw made even the experienced detectives freeze in their tracks. 3 bodies lay in the clearing, partially hidden by fallen leaves and branches. Even from a distance, it was clear that they were young women. Their clothes were torn, and their bodies were scattered across the clearing, as if the girls had tried to run in different directions. "Oh my God," whispered one of the patrol officers. Howard immediately stopped the group and ordered no one to approach the bodies until the investigation team arrived. Castro began photographing the crime scene from different angles, while the detectives called for backup and a medical examiner. For the next 3 hours, the clearing became a hive of forensic activity. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, Miami-Dade County's chief medical examiner, arrived with 2 assistants and additional equipment. "Preliminary conclusion," she told Howard after her initial examination of the bodies. "All 3 victims are young African-American women between the ages of 20 and 25. Multiple head and body injuries. Death occurred approximately 2 to 3 days ago." The identities of the deceased were quickly confirmed. Keisha Wright was lying at the northern edge of the clearing, her body found 20 meters from the others. Tiara Clark was in the center of the clearing, and Gemma Brown was at the eastern edge, closest to the trail. Castro worked methodically, collecting evidence and recording every detail. The picture of the crime gradually became clearer. "Look at this," she called the detectives to the place where Tiara's body was found. "There are signs of dragging and struggle here. The girl resisted. The ground around the body was torn up, branches were broken, and there were scratches and traces of blood on the trunks of nearby trees. Within a 10-meter radius, Castro found torn pieces of clothing, a broken fingernail, and several hairs. And here, she pointed to a trail of disturbed vegetation leading from the center of the clearing to the spot where Keisha's body was found. It's clear that the victim tried to run. The blood trail stretches for 15 meters. The situation near Gemma's body was somewhat different. The girl was lying face down on the path, and next to her hand on the ground was a smartphone with a broken screen. She tried to call someone, Howard concluded, examining the phone. "It must have been one of the calls to the emergency services." Dr. Santos continued to examine the bodies. "All 3 victims have defensive wounds on their arms and forearms. They tried to defend themselves against their attackers. The main injuries are blunt force trauma to the head and body. Rocks or wooden clubs may have been used. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the crime scene had been fully documented. The bodies were loaded into the medical examiner's vehicle for a detailed autopsy, and the evidence was sent to the lab for analysis." Howard and Daniels returned to the station with a heavy heart. Now they had to break the terrible news to the parents and question the suspects, armed with irrefutable evidence. "Let's talk to the families first," Daniels decided. "They have a right to know first." The next 2 hours were some of the hardest of the detectives' careers. Gloria Wright's screams still rang in Howard's ears as they prepared to reinterrogate the suspects. By 5 o'clock in the evening, all 3, Tyrone Miller, Devin Hill, and Lamar Green, were back in the interrogation rooms. This time, the detectives had enough evidence to make official arrests. Tyrone was the first to be questioned. Howard placed the crime scene photos and the earring found in the woods on the table. "Mr. Miller, we found the bodies of Kayla, Tiara, and Gemma," he said calmly. "They're dead. And we know you're involved." Tyrone turned pale as he looked at the photos. His hands shook more violently. I don't know anything about this, he muttered. Your fingerprints were found on one of the victim's phones, Daniels lied, using standard psychological pressure tactics. DNA analysis from the crime scene has already begun. It wasn't me, Tyrone exclaimed. I didn't kill them. Then tell us what happened, Howard said gently. Help us understand. Tyrone covered his face with his hands and sat silently for several minutes. When he raised his head, his eyes were red. It wasn't our plan, he began in a trembling voice. We weren't going to kill them. I swear to God, we didn't want to kill them. Daniels turned on the tape recorder. Tell us everything from the beginning. Tyrone took a deep breath. Devin, Lamar, and I know each other from work. Lamar suggested making some easy money. He said he saw on the news about rich girls with expensive phones and jewelry. We decided, well, to get to know them, take them to a remote place and take their valuables. And rape them, Howard added. Tyrone nodded without looking up. Yeah. We thought they wouldn't resist if there were 3 of us. We'd take what we wanted and leave them there. We figured they wouldn't be able to identify us if we wore masks. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong, Tyrone whispered. When we got to the sawmill, the girls immediately realized something was wrong. Panic set in. Keisha was the first to try to run away. Lamar grabbed her, but she bit him and broke free. Then everyone else ran in different directions. And you chased after them. We panicked. Devin yelled that they would recognize us, that they would go to the police. We split up and ran after them into the forest. It was dark, we were stumbling, yelling at each other. The girls were also screaming, trying to call on their phones. Tyrone fell silent, wiping the sweat from his forehead. What happened next? Daniels gently prodded him. I caught up with Keisha near a clearing. She was holding her phone, trying to talk to someone. I just wanted to take the phone away, but she hit me in the face. I pushed her, and she fell and hit her head on a rock. She stopped moving immediately. What about the other girls? Devin found Tiara. She was trying to hide behind a tree, calling the police. He said he just wanted to stop her, but she kept screaming. He hit her with a stick he picked up off the ground. Once, then again. He couldn't stop. And Gemma? Tyrone shook his head. Lamar caught up with her last. He says she begged him to let her go, offered him money. But he said it was too late, that we had gone too far. I didn't see how it happened, but when we met in the clearing, it was over. Howard recorded the testimony, feeling a mixture of disgust and relief. The case was solved. What did you do next? We were in shock. We realized we had made a terrible mistake. We tried to hide the bodies under leaves and branches, thinking they wouldn't be found. Then we quickly left and agreed not to tell anyone. Whose idea was it to use dating apps? Lamar's. He said it was safer to meet online, gain their trust, and then lure them in. We didn't even know they were friends until we all met at the mall. Tyrone's confession was the key to the case. Over the next 3 hours, detectives received similar statements from Devin and Lamar. Each tried to shift the blame onto the others, but the overall picture was clear. Lamar Green was the instigator of the crime. He was the one who came up with the plan to meet someone through an app and chose the location for the attack. Devin Hill was the most violent. He was the one who delivered the fatal blows to Tiara. Tyrone Miller, despite his attempts to portray himself as a passive participant, killed Keisha with his own hands. By midnight, all 3 had been formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The prosecutor had already announced his intention to seek the maximum penalty. Howard and Daniels finished processing the paperwork after midnight. The case, which began with routine missing persons reports, ended with the arrest of 3 murderers and the solving of a brutal crime. Poor girls, Daniels said as she locked the safe containing the case files. They just wanted to meet some guys and they got trapped. Howard nodded, thinking of the cries for help that the dispatch center had heard on that terrible night. Keisha, Tiara, and Gemma had spent the last minutes of their lives in terror, running through the dark forest and praying for a rescue that never came. Rain pounded on the station windows again, washing away the dust and dirt from the streets of Miami. But nothing could wash away the pain of loss from the hearts of the parents of 3 young women whose lives were cut short by the greed and cruelty of 3 men who would now spend the rest of their days behind bars.